In family businesses, there's unique sets of conflict that are different than everyday day-to-day business because we have the added complexity of family dynamics when mean-spirited conflict arises. People entrench themselves in their positions. They don't move from it, and they get far more self-righteous about that position, and nothing gets done. Healthy conflict is one of the most valuable tools that you can engage in your organization. If you find yourself in an organization that is more mean-spirited, where it's just angry, it's insulting, the way to kind of overcome that is to start leaning into things like care and compassion. Collaboration is a way to get over that mean-spirited conflict. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Flow Over Fear. I am your host, Adam Hill. I'm a fourth-generation family business CEO. I'm a family business advisor, and I've started this podcast so that we can have some kind of community around our family business, so that there's some resources or some like-minded stories that we can relate to while I interview different people from different backgrounds and different family businesses and advisories, so that we can all lift each other up. Because family businesses, frankly, are responsible for about 60% of the United States GDP. And over the world, I think that number is very similar, if not more. In fact, I just got back from a trip from Europe where my wife and I spent our 20th anniversary, and it was amazing. We hadn't been to Europe in our entire lives, and it was incredible because, you know, coming from the United States, coming from Los Angeles, and not having seen that, you know, the amount of history that we're able to see is generally dates back to the 1920s with the architecture of Los Angeles or Denver or wherever we lived. But when you go to Europe, you see things that are hundreds of years old, and that includes the businesses that you see on the side of the street. I was probably one of the only people that paid attention to this, but you know, every other pub that we passed by in London or in Barcelona or clothing store or something like that, you know, they had the established in 1756 or established in 1682. I'm not kidding. I saw businesses that were established in the 1800s. So internationally, I know I'm going off on a big tangent here, but internationally, you know, because a lot of the countries in Europe are so much older, there's more legacy family businesses that date back even farther. And I would imagine that they contribute to more of the world economy than we give it credit for. And even in the United States, it's still a majority of the business revenues that come from family businesses. So what I'm trying to say is that family businesses are a magnificent force in this world. And that's why I wanted to start this podcast, is because I've grown up. I was born into the world of family business. Now I run a family business, and I recognized when I entered into the world of our business and took over as the president and CEO, how unique those challenges that we face are, how sometimes frightening and terrifying and overwhelming they can be, how much of a weight it can bear. And I think that only increases by the length of time that you spend and the legacy that you have and the weight of that legacy. It's not a bad thing. It can actually be an amazing and wonderful thing. And like I said, it contributes to so much of what our world has become. But it's also an overwhelming responsibility. And so we need to be together. And that's why I wanted to create this space for us to share, and wanted to interview people and learn from people that are in the trenches of family business, whether it be owners or operators or advisors in this world. And one of the common themes that comes up in, you know, family businesses and businesses in general is something I want to talk about in depth today, which is conflict. Conflict is something that comes up in every single business that has ever existed. From the most successful companies to the ones that have failed. And I would imagine the ones that have failed have probably had a lot of conflict. Naturally, they failed. But for family businesses in particular, even, transcending the idea of business where conflict exists, in family businesses, there's unique sets of conflict that are different than everyday day-to-day business because we have the added complexity of family dynamics. We have the added complexity of generational communication and differences and dynamics that way. We have the added complexities of trying to maintain a legacy for the long term and building on it. So that conflict often becomes harder to broach. I think if you are a next gen leader, maybe trying to take over a company, you may relate to this because I know that from my perspective in coming into leadership, I was still working with people that, had known me when I was in diapers. And from that perspective, if conflict arose, it was very hard, very overwhelming to have to kind of have a useful and a dialogue that wasn't rooted in some kind of fear of like, I don't want to anger this person who I know that I respect or that has been with me all my life, that I've looked up to at company picnics way back in the 1970s and 80s. That's kind of the nature of how conflict is challenging for next gen leaders. And I, like many of you, if you're leading a company or you're in leadership or you're feeling that way, you may have mentors or coaches that you work with to work with you. I do as well. I have a coach that I've been working with for a few years named Kirk Wyman of Icon Coaching, and he's helped me through a lot of this conflict. But I remember talking to him with some conflicts in particular when I was earlier in my career, and I was just thinking to myself, gosh, it's so overwhelming. I don't know how we can get over this conflict because these particular individuals are so entrenched in their position, and I cannot convince them to see it my way, or I don't see a positive way to actually broach the subject without offending them or hurting them or whatever. And he brought it up this way. He talked about, he said, in every business, you as a leader, you're walking around the perimeter of a dark forest. And within that dark forest, you can't see what's inside. And so by its very nature, it's uncertain of what's in there. There's monsters in there. There could be something really scary in there. There could be things that eat you. There could be things that tear you apart and rip you to pieces and throw you out the other side. But also in that dark forest is a solution to the issue that you have. There's a solution. And when you can find that solution, like the sword of Excalibur, sticking out of the rock or whatever, and I'm totally probably getting that wrong. As you take that sword out, you essentially exit the dark forest into a brave new world. No, I know that the way I presented that was a very, bombastic analogy, but it does demonstrate a point that, a lot of the reason that we don't enter into that dark forest of conflict is because of fear, the fear of the unknown, the fear of uncertainty. And when there's uncertainty in our mind, we fill that void with the extremes, the extreme case scenarios. It's a defense mechanism, and it's a protective mechanism that goes generate. I mean, it's part of our human DNA to have that defense mechanism. From an evolutionary standpoint, it's what prevented us from walking into the caves of bears and just saying, "Hi, how you doing?" That's why we had that defense mechanism. But over time, over the period of generations, now that we have the comforts of our home and refrigerators and garage door openers and central heating and air, we don't face a lot of that level of danger. And yet that evolutionary fear is still spinning around and causing us terror in the face of uncertainty. But as I used to talk about on my podcast, Flow Over Fear, I talked a lot about the nature of fear and how we experience it. And I talked a lot about the idea that there's two ways that we experience fear. And the first way that we experience fear is danger. It is the walking into the bear cave and saying, and that fear that we have when we're legitimately in danger. as if we know that a bear is going to rip us apart. So we don't go into that bear cave. So we know we don't because we're in danger. But there's another type of fear that exists that isn't related to danger, but we still perceive it in that way. We still perceive it in that way because we think we're in danger. But it happens to be an opportunity because from an evolutionary standpoint, it actually just presents itself in the same, those opportunities, those uncertainties where there's a bit of discomfort that we have to face in order to grow. It presents itself in the same way as we experience danger. And so that same fear tripwire triggers in us. And so we have that danger, that fear response. But all we have to do really in that case is just ask that question, is this danger or is this opportunity? And when we can ask, is it opportunity, we may take that first step into the dark forest. And then it all comes about is how do we typically deal with conflict? And there was a real eye-opening formula or structure on conflict, or what do you call it? A diagram of conflict, if you will, that I learned about through EOS, through the implementation of EOS in our company, when our implementer presented us and asked us to read Patrick Lencioni's The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And in that book, it talks about something called the conflict continuum. And in that conflict continuum, it talks about two, broad ends of the spectrum that we experience, that we approach conflict in our world when we see conflict. And this really also kind of goes into that fear response because it's almost like a fight or flight response in this case. On one end of that continuum, there's mean-spiritedness, mean-spirited conflict. And that's the type of conflict where you're yelling at someone, where you see that conflict and you want to yell, you want to scream, you want to insult that person. How dare they bring that up? And they should be ashamed of themselves. And then they entrench themselves in their position. What happens when you get mean-spirited about conflict? Well, if you're paying attention to our politics nowadays, I think you can understand what happens when mean-spirited conflict arises. People entrench themselves in their positions. They don't move from it, and they get far more self-righteous about that position, and nothing gets done. The conflict doesn't get solved. It just sits there in the air. Tangents arise. We go into deeper elements of things that don't even relate to the conflict, and we just get mean. And that's one side of the conflict, and that in and of itself is unhealthy. In fact, they call it destructive because it destroys any opportunity for progress on that front. But then there's the other side of that conflict continuum, way, way on the other side. There's people that are, there's the people that are more in the flight area of fight or flight. And on this side, it's called artificial harmony. And it's where people really just try to avoid the conflict altogether. They resort instead to pleasantries or niceties like, oh, you're doing a good job and blah, blah, blah. And they don't expressly go into the conflict, and instead they just ignore it completely in the pursuit of artificial harmony. That's why they call it artificial, because the conflict is still there. In fact, it could be even worse than mean-spirited conflict because you don't even address the conflict at all. And what happens when you don't address conflict? Well, what happens when you don't address a stick of dynamite that is burning on the wick in the middle of a fireworks factory? Well, eventually it goes off, it explodes. There's this seething resentment that is happening under the surface. All of those issues continue to pop up, but you don't address them, and you don't acknowledge them. And what's even worse and insidious about artificial harmony is that a lot of times in leadership, if you may not even be aware that you're immersed in that artificial harmony, because you are simply trying to keep the peace. You're trying to keep everything nice, and on the surface everything looks great, but under the surface it's unhealthy. There's toxicity, there's resentment, and it's not a healthy environment. So that is not a healthy form of conflict either. And so those two extremes, mean-spirited conflict and artificial harmony, are no way to manage conflict. So how do we do that? We find that space in the middle that's called healthy conflict. And when you can find that space in the middle with healthy conflict, well, that's where you can start to bring about the positive change. You can start to address the key issues in your organization that are causing you strain. You can really start to dig into the issues that will make a difference, that will move the needle. You will remove them as obstacles, and you'll start to make progress. And that's why healthy conflict is one of the most valuable tools that you can engage in your organization, if you can do it. Because artificial harmony, mean-spirited conflict, think about how much value they are destroying, because you're not addressing the issues, or you're entrenching yourself in ego beliefs or things like that. So talking about the mean-spirited side first, if you find yourself in an organization that is more mean-spirited, where it's just angry, it's insulting, it's digging in and entrenching in this conflict, and it's just so toxic. Well, the way to kind of overcome that is to start leaning into things like care and compassion. Start leaning into that a little more. And this is actually one of our company's core values. The company that I run's core value is we are caring and compassionate. And it takes a lot of work to be caring and compassionate. In fact, I just wrote an article for our newsletter internally in our company about what it means to be caring and compassionate, because a lot of us can have a differing opinion of that. And part of that is to engage in this healthy conflict in an honest and respectful way. Is instead of putting those issues that you have between you, you put them in front of you. Don't start placing blame, or don't start digging into people or things like that, but start digging into the issue. Make the issue the problem to be solved, not the person, not the personalities. And if you have a healthy organization that you have an accountability structure, and you're working through, or you're working with the system like EOS, it gives you a mechanism to put that structure in place and that accountability in place, so that you don't have to feel like you're blaming people all the time, but instead you can put the issues in front of you and you can start to solve them in that way. And if you could do that instead of putting them between you, that's a way to get over that mean-spirited conflict. That part of it really just takes a level of self-awareness and humility to put your ego aside and to start asking the right questions. And that gets into the second really way to get over that mean-spirited conflict, is to, instead of leaning into the judgment, I'm going to use one of my favorite Ted Lassoisms, and I think he stole it from was it Walt Whitman or something like that? I don't remember what that was, but Ted Lasso: be curious, not judgmental. Don't lean into judgment right away. So thinking about it in that way, what questions can you ask aside from, why are you such a jerk? That's probably not the right question. But what legitimately like questions can you ask to get to the root of the issue, to start to solve it? And that can put you in a place of humility where you put the issue in front of you and not between you. That's a way to get through mean-spirited conflict. On the other side of the spectrum, with artificial harmony, it's a little more challenging, because that almost digs into the culture of the organization, because it's so entrenched in that organization. Somebody has to have the courage to walk into that dark forest first and start moving into that forest. And that may come across if you are somebody in an artificial harmony organization that decides that I'm going to walk into that dark forest. I'm going to start asking the questions. I'm going to start leaning into these issues that everybody's ignoring, or the conflict that everybody's ignoring. One of the challenges you face is that you can be perceived as mean-spirited, because it's against what your organization is doing. You're going to that side of the spectrum. But in reality, if you are careful about that, or if you take the right kinds of steps, you can move through that artificial harmony. So how do you know, first of all, I mentioned earlier, one of the challenges is that when you're in that state of artificial harmony, a lot of times as an owner, you might not know. Well, a couple of ways that you might start to figure that out is that there's not a lot that you find that in your weekly meetings or however you run them. We run level 10 meetings where we have an issues list, and our issues, we have a series of issues that pop up. Well, you might find that you are living in a state of artificial harmony if there are no issues on your issues list. If you're finding that you have too few issues, or those issues aren't substantial, or that there's no amount of debate in there, you might find you're in artificial harmony when you spend too much time praising, which isn't a bad thing, but just kind of more superficially praising people than really kind of trying to ask questions about the issue. That's an artificial harmony thing. So if there's not a lot of issues coming up, you find yourself being kind of superficially nice instead of kind. Well, that's problematic. And you might also find you're in artificial harmony if you've reached something of a plateau with your performance, whether it be your personnel performance or your evaluations of your people, where they're kind of if everybody's getting an A+ and you're not moving the needle, then something's wrong. There's something missing there that you might need to dig in. You might need to ask a few questions like, well, why are we not hitting our numbers if everybody's getting an A+? So on that note, scorecards and KPIs, things like metrics, are a great way to pierce the veil of artificial harmony, because then you have a number, you have a specific result that you're looking for that you can ask the question on and start to lean into that conflict with some evidence behind it. So it doesn't have to be mean-spirited. It could be more objective. And that's often very helpful. And of course, so that you don't get into that mean-spirited side, so you don't jump the shark and go all the way to the mean-spirited side, you want to make sure that you practice care and compassion and kindness with regard to that. That's really what care and compassion is being able to put yourself in the other person's shoes and understand where they've come from, not dismiss the behaviors, the actions that might have led to the conflict in the first place, but also be more considerate that there's a human being behind that, and that collectively you can work toward the same goal, which leads to the idea of collaboration. Collaboration is a way to get over that mean-spirited conflict. How can you work with the people that you're having a conflict with? How can you embrace conflict in a positive way? And a lot of times, if you feel like you're just too far gone, or too many people are entrenched in egos or things like that, what you might find is that you need some help. And that's where outside facilitation can come in. If you can find an outside perspective, a lot of times they would be much quicker to discover or call out or share, hey, are you missing something there? Are you not addressing something that you need to address? Or is there something in between you two that you need to work through? Because that can get there. Somebody who has an objective, non-biased, has no skin in the game, no dog in the fight kind of opinion, and they can start to ask the right questions of that. That's where things like an outside advisor come in. And I did an episode on the benefits of outside advisors, especially in family business, because in a family, we know that conflict can be pretty extreme. If you have siblings, you know how that conflict can be and unproductive it can be. But you can overcome it if you have some kind of outside facilitator. And that can help get through that. There's a lot of different ways you could do that. There's outside advisors for all sorts of things, whether it's HR, finance, EOS. One of our greatest outside facilitators is our EOS implementer. And that's how, you can really start to work through that conflict. Conflict is naturally, it's just there's no easy way to make it. There's no way to make conflict easy, nor should it be, because within conflict, within the nature of conflict, because every business faces it, there's growth, and so that's a powerful and a really positive tool, and that may even be something to start with when you're talking with your team or your family. That the idea that you're going through this conflict is not unique. It's the one thing that everybody in the universe has in common, is that we're going to have conflict of some kind. And if we can actually embrace it as a good thing, as something that allows us to have the healthy debates, to not be so entrenched in our position, but debate with passion and then align with conviction at the end, that's when you can find, your true north. That's when you can start to find that alignment and build toward your vision. Focus on the common good, on the greater good as an organization. Then you'll start to look at conflict a little differently. If you can put that conflict in front of you, focus on getting to the greater good instead of putting that conflict between you. If you can walk into the dark forest and start looking for the solution, even amidst the monsters and the uncertainty, then you'll start to accelerate as a company. It'll remove so many obstacles. And if you can master the art of engaging in healthy conflict, of finding that center point on the conflict continuum, you can become unstoppable as an organization and as a family. And I think that too can help you greater find more love, more legacy, and a higher level of lifestyle in your business. Thanks for joining me today. I hope to see you next time. Thanks for joining me on this episode of the Fearless Family Business Show. If you're enjoying this show, please thumbs up this episode and subscribe wherever that subscribe button is. And you'll get more family business education and insights in your inbox. And if this episode resonated with you, share it with a friend, a colleague, a spouse, your mom, your dad, a second cousin, whomever you think might benefit from hearing this show. And if you're in a family business and you've got a great story to share, contact me because I would love to see if you'd be a great fit for this show. I'd love to interview you. Or if you're struggling in your family business to find your unique identity or voice, or you need an injection of new life into your family business, I'd also love to hear from you. I'd love to learn more about you, and I'd love to see if I can help. Simply email me at adam@fearlessfamilybusiness.com, and we'll get you connected to the right place. Together, we can elevate the love, the legacy, and the lifestyle we all experience in our family businesses. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.